The sound of his hand hitting my face echoed off the hospital walls like a gunshot. Time slowed down in a way I never thought was possible outside of movies. The sting spread across my cheek instantly, sharp and burning, and my head snapped sideways from the force of it. Around us, the fluorescent hospital lights buzzed their constant mechanical hum, and somewhere down the hallway, a monitor beeped steadily, indifferently, as if nothing had just happened. But everything had just happened. My stepbrother, Tyler, stood in front of me, his face red with rage, his chest heaving, his hand still raised like he was ready to do it again. "You better start crying," he had screamed, loud enough that a nurse had already appeared at the end of the corridor, her face frozen in shock. "You better start feeling something, because Mom is in there dying because of you." The words hit harder than the slap, because Tyler wasn't entirely wrong. Not about the hitting, never about the hitting, but about the guilt I'd been carrying for 3 weeks, the guilt that had kept me awake every night since my mother was admitted, the guilt that whispered in the darkest hours that maybe, somehow, deep down, this was my fault. I stood there in the hospital hallway, my cheek burning, my eyes dry because I hadn't cried once since this all started, and I made a decision. A decision that would change not just my relationship with Tyler, but my understanding of myself, my mother, and the painful, complicated truth about why sometimes the people we love hurt each other the most. I turned to face Tyler, and instead of running, instead of fighting back, instead of breaking down, I did something he never expected, something that would force him to see everything differently. Are you ready to hear what I did? Because this story isn't about the slap, it's about everything that led up to it, everything that came after, and the moment when the truth finally set us both free. My name is Elaine Carter, and I have spent most of my 23 years of life being the quiet one in every room. Not shy exactly, but careful, observant, the kind of person who watches conversations more than she joins them, who notices the things everyone else misses, who holds her feelings so tightly inside that most people assume she doesn't have any. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the only child of David and Margaret Carter. My parents had a good marriage once. I remember the early years, the laughter in our kitchen, my father swinging me around the living room while my mother watched from the couch with that soft, knowing smile she used to wear. But by the time I was 8, the laughter had quieted. By 10, my father had moved out, and by 12, my mother had married a man named Gerald Hoffman, a quiet, stern accountant who brought with him a son from his previous marriage. Tyler Hoffman was 2 years older than me, 14 when I was 12, and from the very first day, he looked at me like I was an inconvenience he hadn't asked for. Tyler was everything I wasn't. Loud, aggressive, opinionated, constantly demanding attention and space. Where I shrank into corners, Tyler expanded to fill every room. Where I swallowed my emotions, Tyler wore his on his sleeve, and they were almost always anger. Our relationship over the years had been a complicated dance of hostility and grudging coexistence. Tyler resented me for taking up space in his father's new life. I resented Tyler for never giving my mother a chance. We argued constantly, sometimes about nothing, sometimes about everything. But beneath the fighting, there was something else, a shared wound neither of us ever acknowledged. We both felt like we'd lost a parent to someone else. My best friend, Sarah, was the one person who truly understood my home life. She'd been there through every late-night phone call, every frustrated text, every moment when I needed someone to tell me I wasn't crazy for feeling the way I did. Sarah was warm, steady, and fierce in the way that only the best friends are. She defended me when I couldn't defend myself and told me the truth when I needed to hear it, even when it was uncomfortable. My mother, Margaret, had changed significantly after her marriage to Gerald. The woman I remembered from my early childhood, creative, expressive, full of life, had become quieter, more controlled, more focused on maintaining peace at the expense of her own happiness. She drank more than she used to, not enough to call it a problem, or at least that's what she told herself. But I noticed. I always noticed. It started on a Tuesday in March, an ordinary morning that became extraordinary in the span of 10 minutes. I was at work, answering emails at my desk at the small marketing firm I'd been working for a year, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Gerald's number, which was unusual. Gerald and I barely spoke directly. Our communication usually went through my mother, a neutral territory neither of us had to navigate emotionally. "Elaine?" Gerald said, and his voice sounded different. Thin. Scared. Gerald never sounded scared. "You need to come to the hospital, now." My heart dropped into my stomach before he even finished explaining. My mother had collapsed at work. She'd been found unconscious in the break room by a coworker, rushed to the emergency room, and was currently being evaluated. By the time I arrived at the hospital, Gerald was sitting in the waiting room with his hands clasped between his knees, staring at the floor. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. "What happened?" I asked, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. "They're still running tests," he said without looking up. "But they think it might be her liver." The word landed like a stone in still water, rippling outward in every direction. Her liver. I thought about all those quiet evenings when my mother sat alone in the kitchen after Gerald and Tyler had gone to bed, a glass of wine in her hand that was never just one glass. I thought about the bottles I'd seen in the recycling bin, more than seemed normal for one person. I thought about every time I'd noticed but said nothing, because saying something would have meant confronting a truth I wasn't ready to face. The tests came back that evening. Severe liver damage. Not from a single event, but from years of accumulated damage. Alcohol-related liver disease that had progressed far beyond what anyone had realized. My mother was admitted immediately, and the doctors were frank with Gerald and me. Without aggressive intervention, medication, lifestyle changes, and possibly a transplant down the line, her condition would continue to deteriorate. "How long has she been drinking like this?" the doctor asked, looking at Gerald. He shook his head slowly. I didn't know it was this bad. But I knew. I had known for years. And the guilt of that knowledge, of watching and saying nothing, of choosing silence over confrontation, settled onto my shoulders like a physical weight that I could feel pressing down with every breath. Tyler arrived at the hospital that evening, having driven 3 hours from his apartment in Columbus. He walked into the waiting room with his jaw set and his eyes scanning the space until they landed on me, sitting alone in the corner with a cup of cold coffee I hadn't touched. "Where's my dad?" he asked, without greeting. "In the room with Mom. The doctors are explaining the treatment plan." Tyler nodded, then turned to leave, then stopped. He turned back, and something in his expression shifted, not softening exactly, but cracking slightly, the way ice cracks before it breaks. "Is she going to be okay?" he asked, and for a moment he sounded like the 14-year-old boy who had once, briefly, looked at me with something other than resentment when our parents first got married. "They think so," I said, "if she follows the treatment plan." "Good." He left to find Gerald, and I sat back down, my hands wrapped around the cold cup, feeling the weight of everything I hadn't said, pressing harder. Over the next 2 weeks, Tyler and I took shifts at the hospital. Gerald was there every day, barely sleeping, barely eating, consumed with guilt and fear. My mother drifted in and out of consciousness for the first week, and when she was awake, she was confused, sometimes not recognizing where she was. Tyler and I circled each other in those hallways like two planets in conflicting orbits, never quite connecting, never quite colliding. Until the day they did. It was a Thursday afternoon. My mother had been awake that morning, lucid for the first time in days, and she had looked at me with clear eyes and said something that shook me to my core. "Elaine, honey, I'm sorry. I know you saw. I know you knew. I should have listened to you." I had held her hand and told her it was okay, that we were going to get through this together. But inside, something cracked, because she was right. I had seen, I had known, and I had said nothing. When Tyler found out what my mother had said, Gerald must have told him, or maybe he'd overheard, he confronted me in the hospital hallway outside her room. His face was twisted with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Not just anger, something deeper, something that looked like betrayal. "You knew," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You knew she was drinking like that. For how long, Elaine? How long did you just sit there and watch?" "Tyler, it's complicated. How long?" His voice rose, echoing off the sterile white walls. A passing orderly glanced our way nervously. "Years," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "I knew for years." Something broke behind Tyler's eyes. "You better start crying," he screamed, stepping closer, his body vibrating with fury. "You better start feeling something, because Mom is in there dying because of you." And then his hand connected with my face. The slap rang through the hallway. The nurse appeared instantly, her voice sharp and authoritative. "Sir, you need to step back right now." Tyler's hand was still trembling at his side, and I could see the shock beginning to register on his own face, the realization of what he'd just done. But I didn't react the way he expected. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't run. Instead, I took a slow, deep breath, turned to face him fully, and spoke in a voice that was completely calm. "You want me to feel something? Fine. Here's what I feel." I pulled out my phone and held it up. On the screen was a series of text messages, conversations I had saved over the past 2 years, messages between me and my mother, where I had repeatedly, desperately tried to address her drinking. "Mom, I found the bottles again. Please, can we talk about this?" Her response, "There's nothing to talk about, Elaine. I'm fine." Another message from me, "Mom, I'm worried about you. Can you please see a doctor?" Her response, "You're being dramatic. Please stop." Message after message, year after year, of me trying to help and being shut down every single time. Then I scrolled further and showed him another set of messages. These were between Tyler and Gerald, forwarded to me by Gerald 2 days ago with a note that said, "I think you should see this." In these messages, Tyler had been telling Gerald about my mother's drinking for months, not to help her, to use it as ammunition in an ongoing argument about money, about the divorce settlement between Gerald and Tyler's mother, about custody arrangements for Gerald's younger child. Tyler had known about my mother's drinking almost as long as I had, and he had done nothing to help her either. He had used it as a weapon instead. The color drained from Tyler's face as he stared at the phone screen. That's not... "Read it," I said, my voice steady. "Read every word, then tell me again how this is all my fault." The nurse had stopped, watching the exchange with wide eyes. Tyler took the phone from my hand with trembling fingers and scrolled through the messages slowly. I watched his face as he read his own words back to himself, cold, calculating messages that bore no resemblance to the grief-stricken stepbrother standing in this hallway. When he finished, he looked up at me, and for the first time in our entire relationship, I saw something in Tyler's eyes that I had never seen before. Shame. Real, deep, burning shame. "Elaine, he cracked. "I know," I said quietly. "Neither did I. We both failed her, Tyler. Both of us. In different ways, for different reasons, but we both chose not to act when it mattered most." The fight drained out of him like water from a bathtub. His shoulders dropped, his hands fell to his sides, and Tyler Hoffman, the loud, aggressive, always in control stepbrother who had never once shown vulnerability in front of me, began to cry. Not quietly, not stoically. He cried the way someone cries when they finally stop holding everything in, ugly, gasping sobs that shook his whole body. I stood there watching him fall apart, and I felt something unexpected bloom in my chest. Not anger, not satisfaction, compassion. Because I understood, finally, that Tyler's rage hadn't really been about me at all. It had been about his own guilt, his own failure, his own desperate need to point the blame somewhere other than on himself. We were more alike than either of us had ever admitted. The nurse discreetly disappeared, giving us privacy. Tyler sank into one of the hallway chairs, his head in his hands, still crying. I sat down next to him, leaving a careful space between us, and we stayed like that for a long time, without speaking. Finally, Tyler looked up, his eyes red and swollen. "I slapped you," he said, his voice hollow. "I actually slapped you, in a hospital. What is wrong with me?" "You were scared," I said simply, "and angry, and guilty, and you needed someone to blame. That doesn't make it okay." "No," I agreed, "it doesn't, but I understand it." Another long silence. Then Tyler spoke again, quieter this time. "I used her drinking against my dad in arguments about money. I knew it was hurting her, and I used it anyway because I was angry at him for leaving my mom." "I know," I said. "I read the messages." I'm not a good person, Elaine." "You're a person who made bad choices when he was scared and angry," I corrected gently. "That's different from being a bad person. Trust me, I know the difference." Tyler looked at me then, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in 11 years of being connected by our parents' marriage. "How are you so calm right now? I just hit you. I've been horrible to you for years. Why aren't you furious?" "Because being furious won't help Mom get better," I said. "And because I spent the last 2 weeks drowning in guilt about what I didn't do, and I'm tired of guilt. Yours and mine both. The only thing that matters now is what we do from here." We made a pact that afternoon in that hospital hallway. Together, we went to my mother's doctors and told them everything. The full extent of her drinking, the timeline, the details that neither of us had shared before because neither of us had been willing to face them out loud. Together, we sat at her bedside when she woke up and told her the truth, gently but firmly, that her life depended on her choosing recovery. Together, we committed to being the support system she needed, not the silent watchers we'd both been. And together, slowly and painfully, we began to rebuild something between ourselves that had been broken long before that slap in the hallway. My mother spent 2 months in the hospital, followed by 6 weeks in a rehabilitation facility. She fought hard, harder than any of us expected. Tyler visited her every week, and so did I. We sat together sometimes, not talking much, but present, connected. Two people who had spent years resenting each other finally understanding that the resentment had always been misdirected grief. It's been 8 months since that day in the hospital. I'm sitting on my mother's back porch watching the sun set behind the trees, and she's inside making tea, something she does now instead of pouring wine. The house feels different, quieter in a good way, lighter. Tyler is here too, sitting in the yard with his jacket collar turned up against the spring chill, scrolling through his phone. He looks up occasionally and catches my eye, and we share something that used to be impossible between us, a small nod, a quiet acknowledgement that we're in this together now. My mother is sober, 37 days at a time, she tells me, counting carefully, gratefully. She's not out of the woods, and neither are any of us. Recovery isn't a destination, it's a daily choice, and some days are harder than others. But she's choosing it. Every single day she's choosing it. And that's all any of us can do. Choose differently than we did before. Tyler apologized to me formally, sitting across from me at a diner, stumbling over his words in a way that was so unlike him it almost made me laugh. He hasn't hit me again. He probably never will. But more importantly, he stopped hiding behind anger. He stopped using other people's pain as ammunition. He started, slowly, to face his own feelings instead of deflecting them onto everyone else. And me? I stopped being silent. I stopped watching and waiting and hoping someone else would act. I learned that speaking up, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means confronting someone you love, is not cruelty. It's care. The slap in that hospital hallway hurt. I won't pretend it didn't, but it broke something open, in Tyler, in me, in the way we each understood ourselves. Sometimes the moment that looks like destruction is actually the moment everything finally starts to heal. My mother walked outside just now, 2 mugs of tea in her hands, and handed one to me with a smile that reached her eyes in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not giving up on me." "Never," I said, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. And I meant it with every part of myself. Because that's what family does. Even the messy, broken, complicated kind. We don't give up. We just finally learn how to show up.